president, President Carol Folt. Dr. Folt's background is in aquatic biology and ecology, and she holds a joint appointment in our department. She was just joking me, I'm her boss.
And he's my boss.
No, I don't feel that way. She's a highly experienced leader, internationally recognized life scientist, and an award-winning teacher. Since her appointment to the Office of the President of USC, she has done much to promote diversity and equity, advance sustainability in the university, and has done an admirable job stewarding us, the entire university, through a global pandemic. So we are very pleased to be joined by her today for a Q&A focusing on sustainability. I know that's where she's very passionate about. We asked the faculty, students, and staff of our department to submit their questions. And today, Dr. Kelly Sanders, Associate Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering, will moderate the session. I thought she would be the best person to moderate because her research focuses on reducing the environmental impacts of providing energy and water, analyzing tensions between climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies, and anticipating the effects of climate change on energy systems. So Dr. Folt, we're thrilled to have you here, and I'll pass the microphone to Kelly, and thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great. This is my first challenge. I never sit in a chair. We're going to see how this works. But I can actually touch the part of the chair. So.
Yeah, these are tall. These are a challenge. Well, first off, thank you so much for meeting with us today. I know you're incredibly busy, and this is certainly an honor for me. I was thinking that maybe we could just start out by talking a little bit about your background in science. You know, this is almost Earth Day. It's not quite Earth Day. And I was doing a little bit of fangirling about you before this, and I pulled up your paper, Algal Blooms Reduce the Uptake of Toxic Methylmercury in Freshwater Food Web. So it's, you know, you have this incredible background in science even before you came to this very high-level position. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. First of all, it's really fun for me to be here. So, yeah, I have a busy schedule, but I've been really looking forward to this because in spite of the fact that I sit as a president, I started and still think of myself as a faculty member, a scientific researcher, and, you know, I just really love that. So what drives me most are students and faculty talking about the things that they love and they care about. So for me to meet my peeps and my bosses is really fun. And someday I actually hope to teach again too. So maybe we'll co-teach something coming up in the future. So thanks. So I'll do kind of a quick background, but you know, I am an environmental scientist, so I did my master's at UC Santa Barbara. And that I studied pollution in a small lake, an amazing set of things that happened in this little lake called Saca Lake. I don't know if any of you know it, but it's up in the foothills behind Santa Barbara. And that's when I worked on bacteria and chemical interactions. So I was really trained as a limnologist with a lot of biology, but a lot of chemistry and a lot of physics. It's the really great thing about limnology is it was in a lot of departments, could be biology departments, environmental science departments, or even in engineering schools. So I actually thought when I got my PhD to go to Berkeley in environmental engineering and ended up going to Davis because that's where I felt like I had the best department. So that interaction was important, but I studied bacteria, got really excited, moved to Lake Tahoe, I moved up the food chain, studied all the interactions between zooplankton, plankton, and fish, and then as I moved on in my career, just became increasingly interested in the interactions between the biota or the aquatic systems and human impacts, ending up working all the way into mercury. My last projects I was working on were exposure of babies while in utero to mercury. It turns out 300,000 babies a year are born in the United States, probably with neurotoxin degeneration at birth because still they're getting mercury in to the fish they eat. So these are the things that really drove me. And so my work, if you ever look at my papers, can be anything that sounds very, very simple, like what do plankton eat, versus all the way to some high-level ICP-MS version of looking at metal distribution in algae, because I had to go all the way from the highly technical to the highly sort of community-based, and I always loved that too, that you could do this high technical work. So this one about algal blooms is really interesting because as I started working on mercury you probably all know is a biomagnifier. Probably don't have to describe that, but so what that means is it's worse in a lot of ways than many other chemicals because it's the cleanest lakes and the highest in the food web where you actually have the biggest buildup of mercury. So the further away from the source, you can have the worst mercury pollution of all. Up in the polar Arctic, bad pollution in communities that people depend on fish. It's got all that kind of relationship with it. But one of my graduate students started working on what happens if a lake gets more and more pollution, do you actually diminish the amount of mercury in the fish? And actually that's a really interesting question. And he started working on it. We did some studies that actually show that algal blooms can dilute the amount of mercury that goes in the fish. The first person that used that paper was people fighting cleaning up the Everglades. And they started using this as a paper that proved, oh, let it get dirty, you'll stop mercury pollution. My graduate student was in tears. I don't want to work on this stuff anymore. This is horrible. But it's just so interesting that the work that we do, you follow the pathway. That doesn't mean pollute, but it means that if you're trying to understand patterns of distribution, these biological features do it. So I always love that one. Interesting that you picked it because it's kind of where we are as environmental biologists, engineers, people who work on sustainability. Not every fact in a single piece lines up with what we might really believe and we're really trying to pursue. But the pursuit of those facts is still really, really interesting to us. So did all that, then I got involved in Superfund. It really changed in a way my whole focus because it turns out that 1 in 4 children live within a mile of a leaking Superfund site in America right now, leading us to understand things about distribution, how do you clean them up, can you clean them up, became very, very applied. And I did a lot of that work when I went into administration. So my biggest driver in administration has often been the things I was doing in science. It was wonderful. And it wasn't until I came here that I actually didn't have a postdoc or graduate student anymore. So I miss it, but I got a pretty good and exciting job and a lot of great things to do. But it helped me in this passion-driven work on sustainability. Last point about me is that I was at the first climate change symposium that the United States held in about 1994, already working on climate change, really caring about it, again, taking this, my own kind of approach to it. But I think I just hit a point in my life and I said, come on, there's no more time. Do not stop. This, if I do nothing else, then try to help energize and build people to succeed in doing some things to really start reversing those and working in a positive way, I would feel like I have had an incredible opportunity to do it. So that's where we are on that, and I know we'll talk more about it, but the good thing is there is an army of people wanting to do it now, so that's what we need to do.
That's really fantastic. It's really interesting to hear about how your research impacted policy as a researcher, and now here you are as a president also impacting the world in a greater way. And so I want to get a little bit into that. So full disclosure, I came to USC in 2014, and I think it's uncontroversial. I'm not sure if I'll get fired. My bosses are in the room as well. USC wasn't necessarily the leader in sustainability, we'll say. You know, it might have been hard to find a recycle bin, and when I went to class, I told my classes, and some of my students from that time are in the audience, this is an opportunity for us. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit here. This is where you make the difference because, you know, we're going from being not so aggressive and we could do a lot of good here. And you come in and you've made some really, really incredible changes, and we've seen those changes. You just walk around the campus and you kind of feel a different energy around, you know, this green, this sustainability. So I'm just wondering, could you talk a little bit about some of your priorities here for sustainability? What are you most proud about? Because in the midst of dealing with a global pandemic, you know, your tenure here hasn't been very easy, but I still see all of these changes. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
You know, I'll go back a little bit further to that because You know, and this I think is probably true for engineering, but certainly in biology, a big part of my formative years, if you did what was called applied work, you didn't tell anyone, you just did it. And it was ridiculous, but as a limnologist, we began already working on policy. When I worked at Tao, all I wanted to do was keep the lake blue. You know, so I think sometimes our training is fortunate in that it has directed us towards things that would have been thought not to be academically so rewarding. That luckily has really changed, but not that recently. So even in 2014, I would talk to a lot of people. I think at that point I was at UNC, which was much more integrated in its policy life than, say, Dartmouth was, which was still more doing the work that was more what would have been traditional basic, except in the area of maybe you might say the environment, because they were leading there. So partly it was learning that we could take and do all the great basic research we ever wanted to do, but what was wrong with having humans be part of it? What was wrong with having it be a policy driven? And in fact, that made it for me much more exciting. So I think that's how I began that movement. And the environment was so obviously a place where only an integrated approach will work. You could do lots of great seminal work and advanced things, but if you haven't worked with humanists and policy people and everything, you can't make the big changes. So when I came to USC, I tell you, I actually thought it was going to be really farther ahead in sustainability. That I thought, oh, I'm going to Southern California. That's the one thing they're already going to have been doing. But so I didn't see it, but then I did see it. We did, within my first couple of weeks here, I said, let's get an audit of what's happening. And found out there were almost 25 different centers and research groups. So everybody was actually doing it, but they weren't unified. They didn't know about each other. The siloing was actually silencing what was already pretty exciting work. I got connected with Dan, who is just dedicated to bringing people forward, and Hannah and that whole president's research group. And so the truth is, it was like putting a tiny spark to kindling that was all ready to go. And it just exploded, driven by our students and everyone. So I think that's one of those examples where the work was there, but if you don't call it out, you don't get that response. So giving that voice, I've been so proud. So one of my most proud of, I'm most proud of the fact that that group brought more than 100 people together already. They're so far ahead of what I could have been dreaming before I even came, and they're igniting what I do think is one of the greatest issues of our day. And we're doing it with real heart, with really practical solutions. You've got to be somewhat practical. And I think that we're going to have a lot of opportunity, not only with these big things that we'll talk about in a minute, that they've already said, you know, we've changed the time frame on them by 10 to 20 years in just 2 years. Suddenly went from maybe we'll do it in 20 years to now we're going to do it next year. That speed and acceleration, if we become the university, the standard bearer for speed, acceleration on collaborative work, there is no stopping what we can do. So I'm really excited, and I don't know if I say take pride, I'm proud of all of you in doing it, but I feel really fortunate to be in the center of it.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see the changes. And that kind of brings us to, you know, that's the university level. We're also operating within the city of Los Angeles. And I think it's safe to say that most people don't necessarily see LA as, you know, the beacon of sustainability, but the city in the last few years have announced these incredibly aggressive goals. So I know some of the researchers in the room are here because I've worked with you, but some people here actually worked on this plan to get to the city to commit to 100% renewable energy, which is the most aggressive renewable energy plan in the country, if not, you know, for any large municipality in the world. So really, really exciting. We also have goals to recycle 100% of our wastewater, and we're a couple percent right now. We have goals for zero carbon transportation by 2050, zero carbon building, zero waste. So the city has incredibly aggressive goals. We are the largest employer within that city. So I'm personally curious, how does that, do we have a collaborative relationship with the city? Are we working to facilitate those goals? Because we do have quite a large footprint, so I'm just wondering, how does university kind of play into this larger ecosystem of Southern California, where our goals can kind of align with their goals?
So that's such a good question. The truth is, there are a number of people sitting here who are the center of this city work already. So we have to communicate. We've got to get people to know more and more about what everyone's doing. One of the first people I met was Eric Garcetti, and as an environmentalist, I love Eric Garcetti's sustainability goals, and I think they're real. And then I found out that a lot of you are already working on them. We have some of the leading Metrans. All the work that goes into these new transportation plans is coming right out of here. Already that. Dornside, I was able to fund something right away, has already done the first phase of the project to start planting trees into neighborhoods because so many of our low-income neighborhoods have no shade, so we're involved there. I started meeting with Eric my very first couple of weeks and have been in a number of those great conversations with him. And then I find out that it's many of our own people. I went down and I met with Hilda Solis, and they want us to be working with them on the green belt. So I could go through every one of those and say, we're there, we're a part of it. But beyond that, we're really trying to build out our own electric fleet. One of the things that really I want to raise money is to give very low interest rates for anyone who works here who wants to get an electric car. We want to do that. We've got all these other big sustainability goals. We're getting to the 2025 in part for carbon because of things the city is actually doing in the way we purchase power. So we can't advance without them doing some of it. And honestly, we can become the proof point that this can happen and that research can actually be the big driver with these community partnerships. So, they really, there are an incredible number of them. I think two of the first things I did, one of them was to really cut in half the cost for anybody, subsidize half of anyone's transportation costs here. And that was many millions of dollars. A lot of people took advantage of it. Then we got COVID, no one wanted to go on public transportation. Maybe people will come back. I think if we could subsidize electric vehicles, we'd see that when our whole fleet change. So, water use, waste use, those are big city things, but they don't do it really without us. And then Alta Sea's the next one. That's again got real connections here to Viterbi, is building out this beautiful seaport research center and getting businesses that do the blue economy. A number of them are going to be your faculty and students doing it. So you're right in there in really, really good ways.
Yeah, and that's one of the really exciting opportunities here is how we actually use the city and the ecosystem, Catalina and Alta Sea, for doing some of our research.
And they use the city uses us
Yeah.
actually as a way. I will say Eric always talks about SC wherever he is, and he then throws in UCLA and Caltech. But he talks about us first because they've been working. Some of their biggest initiatives, they don't have the talent to do some of the technical and the research work, and they have been very good. I think that's something deans have encouraged is really good. And I'll make a little bit of a joke, but I think the next mayor, whether it's one of the two top candidates, is going to have a USC connection. So I think we're going to be really connected with the next mayor too. And so actually the top three candidates all have very strong USC connections. So I think we'll be able to keep all these great things going for the city.
Yeah, so a lot of our audience today is from the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. So whether these students or faculty are on the building side, where they're trying to come up with safer, more sustainable buildings, or whether they're on the environmental side, trying to treat cleaner water, reducing our energy uses, etc. And how can we help? How could we facilitate the university's goals or the city's goals? Do you see there to be collaborative opportunities between what we're doing here to kind of help make actionable science for your goals and the broader goals?
I think with the city, we've really been developing out a partnership with the people that go down in the city and talk to the people. So mostly I think the better we understand who is here. When we hear about things, we can direct people. And I think you must hear about it a lot. I think that's a place that, it's almost like you want to have better and better directories or more people that can say, wow, working on that issue, I know this person, they can come. So the university can almost be a facilitator of the connection that needs to be made. I think that's one way. One of the ideas that the task force has, and I think is really great, is that we develop more startup funds, kinds of things that are faculty-driven projects, and they can be related to projects that we're trying to do, but get our own investigators to give us the answer. And also trying to develop out a very strong postdoc program, because we all know busy researchers take on new projects usually by having a great postdoc. And the better we can tie some of those programs to the initiatives we're doing, or the in teaching, in our research, or in working with the city, then I think we just accelerate that rather than making it just who wants to work on something, trying to find a way that very committed, busy people can actually expand their portfolio. The other one is just be involved in the task force, because they're setting the directions for us, and so in setting the directions for us, then that makes it very likely that we'll connect deeper into the departments. But having 100 people already from all the different schools there, I think there's a better understanding probably about sustainability right now than almost anything else that we do here, and yet even there, we don't know it all.
Yeah, the people are energized. I know I see some people in the room that have taken on USC sustainability projects in my classes and have presented the plans to you.
Exactly. So. And those classes do amazing things. You know, I mean, and we often take exactly what you do and then do it. So I think more of that, just being able to give it a little bit more, I think you need to give a little bit more funding to it, because it isn't always something that people can take on without some support. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
For funding. Selfless plug.
What is
Selfless plug. So one of the things I'm always struck by when I hear you speak is just your optimism. You know, again, you just navigated this university through a pandemic and, you know, a number of large challenges. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of draw on wisdom that you generated throughout your career and tell us how to remain optimistic, because this is even something that I struggle with when I teach about issues like climate change and, you know, all of these just massive challenges and these transitions that we need to do to get from where we are at point A to where we need to be at point B. How do you avoid burnout? How do you stay optimistic? How do you continue to face this day after day after day? And still be so bright and cheery-eyed about it. Because I think especially in the environmental realm, burnout is real. So I could certainly use the advice some days.
You know, at a just at a deeply personal level, I am a lucky person. I have an optimistic personality since the time I was young. I mean, I think those are real things that we deal with, and we can take whatever we are and use it. But for me, that's how I every morning I wake up pretty optimistic in spite of things. And you have to keep yourself well. You have to be able to, you know, do the things that you need to take care of yourself, because no one can be optimistic if you're not taking care of yourself. And so, and that's not a small thing we never talk about in these faculty members, but it's really so huge. And the longer I've been in the world, the more I know how critical it is, and we should recognize that. But I think my husband is an environmental scientist who worked for years in the tropical rainforest. I gotta tell you, I know almost no tropical biologists who don't want to weep almost every day. It makes me want to weep every day for what I even saw myself 20 years ago and what is happening now. That's how coral reef biologists feel. You know, so we can all go there. We see it, we know it, and we know that the window is narrowing. So that's what you're asking me, how do you get past that? I think to some extent I pull out my engineer, and I pull out my artist, and I pull out my mother. Those are the three parts of me that help me. As an engineer, what I love is solving problems. If you can understand that it's never too late if you start today. So many great people have said that. That absolutely has to be our mantra. I will not say it is ever too late. I'm not going to go there. It doesn't mean it doesn't get harder. It doesn't mean some things aren't irreversible, but that's my engineering mindset, I think. There's a problem. We've got great people. Let's start knocking off the pieces we can do. So I go there. What about my artist? You know, I was an art major before I became, I turned to humanism, to think about the bigger things in life. When I talk about sustainability now, I usually look for poetry. You know, I try to find those things that are the human connection, because I think us telling people what to do is not going to be nearly as important as if we can relate to them as the humans we are. So I find that. And then I think you find your optimism because you're driven by the next generation. My kids, my grandkids, their kids, our students. You know, our students are going to live in a world that I haven't helped fix yet, or I'm trying to, you know, so I think you find the different things that matter to you. For others, it might be spiritually, but you turn to all parts of yourself to be optimistic. But working with other people, even on small pieces, they add up to a lot. You know, we have 80,000 people here. We have 450,000 alums. If USC puts its mind to something, we have an enormous number of people. So, and you probably do it through teaching. I'm sure that gives you optimism.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's very regenerating. I want to make sure that we get to a couple of the questions that the students might have in the audience. So I just want to put that plug out there to think of questions that you might have for Dr. Folt. But before that, I'm just wondering, do you have your kind of pet environmental issue that if you were, you know, had superpowers you were able to fix?
I protect the oceans.
Yeah.
And it's not just because I love water, but I don't know what we're going to do if we don't protect the oceans. But by itself, that's too big a thing. That's a perfect example where we need estuary biologists. We need people working on coastal. We need people figuring out how to manage this shared global resource that we're managing so poorly. But I mean, I can't, it's hard for me not to put forest back in there. But I'd say we have to protect the oceans.
Yeah, it's all connected. And I did see a step forward through that. I saw USC announce that it's going to eliminate plastic bottles across campus.
You know, amazing. So we're going to go carbon 2025. We're aiming for zero waste 2028, and we're already making big progress in that. But the bottles are a huge part of it, and we announced that. And then I don't know if you saw, the state of California and the city of Los Angeles are starting to make real moves towards making those legislative. But they're talking about 2035, and we produce 15,000 bottles a week. So 15,000 bottles a week, start watching those movies of all the plastic. It's huge. If we do it, other schools are going to do it. When we divested, which was a big movement here when I came, driven by students, something I really wanted to do, many other schools followed. So those are things where we do have a position that people will see, and if we can actually figure out how to do that starting right now, starting in, in July 1, and our operations are already working on it. In that case, one of the main distributors, I think it's Coca-Cola, has decided they will not distribute anything on our campus that is not in a recyclable container. Do you know how huge that is? If they start doing that everywhere, if Coke products are only sustainable bottles, and then everyone else will, this could go from not a 2035 goal, this actually could become a 2027 goal, a 2028 goal. So they're really exciting, and that's coming out of that workforce and operations, and I think students, you all have to be a part of it though. You can't bring all your plastic in from home.
And we have to learn how to get the right thing in the right bin.
And they've added a lot more bins and a lot more solar panels, but yeah, you really do have to be a part of it, because we can stop people buying it, but we can't stop you using it. So.
Yeah, I think waste management has been actually one of our big success stories here at USC. I think a lot of people don't realize, but the stadium, when we have our football games, they get to nearly 90% diversion, which means that only 10% of the waste stream is going to landfills, which is pretty incredible, because if you think about your state at the football team, I'm looking at or your football game, I'm looking at the younger people in the audience. You know, it's not necessarily the state of, you know, trying to get everything into the bins.
But you know, we keep winning. So the Pac-12 is actually moving pretty well. And we keep winning the sustainability challenge, but there are a couple, I mean, you want them all to be challenging for that. Now we have to do it in our hospital. Can you imagine if you really green out the healthcare, green out the ports with transportation, green out healthcare, might not get that far, start greening out athletics and big events. This thing that we've been telling everybody is grim and dismal starts being a lot more hopeful, even though there are big things ahead. But it starts having multiple impact more than just recycling at home. You know, it's a big deal.
Well, and just like you alluded to, I mean, you start it at a big venue like the Coliseum, and it has these supply chain effects. Now, all of a sudden, the vendors have to give you food that's compostable. All of the drinks have to come in containers that are recyclable. And there's this element of education that happens for every single person that hits that Coliseum. So I just feel like that's been a place where we've been this incredible leader for many years, actually.
Yeah.
This is something that's we've been doing for quite a bit.
Really, really
Good time. Yeah.
It makes me remember one of my favorite field trips I used to do was to take students to sewage treatment plants. I think you all can relate to this a little bit. But most people don't have any idea how these things really happen in the environment. So they are totally left trying to fix things they don't even remotely understand. And something like sewage treatment can become really fun if you start understanding what it is.
You're preaching to the choir.
I know,
here.
I know. That's what I know that.
Yeah. So I just wanted to see if there were any questions related to sustainability at USC or sustainability in LA that people had questions about.
Or anything.
Or anything, really. Yes.
I have one. So, as you know, the whole topic of everything is sustainability, and this is a very, very basic question, but I think it's a very important question. Can you define what you're actually implying by sustainability? I think it's a big keyword with a lot of corporations right now, with a lot of businesses, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything in terms of environmental progress. It's more so in sustainability of that business. So I think, just because I'm curious, and just I think a lot of people in this room, it would be helpful for us to all have the same sustainable definition so we know what exactly USC is working towards.
Well, I don't think you're going to get a single definition. I think that would be to oversimplify what is a very complex idea, and the most important thing is we have to understand that. But sustain means not to kill, to nurture, to keep going. I mean, you start there, and you start thinking, what does that mean for this institution? So I could say when I talk about sustainable operations, what I'm talking about is operations that do not use more resources than we can produce in our own footprint. So sustainable water would mean that you tried not to use any more water than fell on this earth. Or so you could get a pretty good definition for almost every piece. And I actually think that's part of the beauty on working on sustainability is getting agreed upon definitions for particular types of tasks. When I talk about sustaining the oceans, it's a bigger issue. What would that really mean? It would mean that when my kids and my kids' kids were around, there were still whales, there were still dolphins, there was clean water. It was still sustaining the life of the planet. You know, so I think we have to understand it is about getting to a position where we're not destroying things by our overuse. And then it has different definitions within each of the realms that we live in. And I think that helps it not be, you know, considered, it just helps people be able to deal with it, but I think it's much more practical. You can't have the same definition for everything. And when sustainability starts being looked at as helping to right some of the disproportionate social ills, I still think that's quite reasonable within it. You could talk about reaching carbon neutrality, but if what it did was destroy some communities and not others, it's not a good thing. So sustainability in there has to carry with it something about the way you achieve these goals, that you're also striving for bigger humanistic goals. Equality of access, and so a lot of people are mad when they say the United States tells everyone else to go sustain, and we use up all the resources, and we tell them to stop using them. So it gets complicated in its implementation, but it has a general goal that then you define for each of the actions that you take. That's how I work with it.
Thank you. Other questions?
So going back to one of the questions that Dr. Standers asked about motivation, as engineers, it's often possible to render problems technical, to think of like climate change and sustainability as just like an engineering problem. But you've seemed to implement so many projects that actually empower students and empower faculty members and the broader USC community to actually think of sustainability and embody it. So can you talk a little bit about leadership and sustainability and how you can inspire others to actually like embrace it, not as necessarily a technical problem, but even something that you genuinely have to care about?
I love that you asked that. I think that's really, really great. And for me, hardly every solution I usually come up to anything involves collaboration. I can't do nearly as well on my own as I can. Put 2 or 3 people together, you've got 5 or 6 people working on it. So, and that goes back to my, since I've been a teacher, a researcher, anything, is that collaborative feel. But over my own life, I've understood that collaboration is also deeply gratifying, humanistically, if it has done well. And in fact, some of the motivation for people may not start exactly at the same sustainability, but it starts about the working together, the fact that as a group, we can accomplish things much bigger than we would do alone. So I think part of the motivation is getting people to see the strength of what they can do with their hands and their hearts and their minds, and how they can leverage their own excited opportunity and get everybody going. So I think that is a big part of it. I think it is important that problems have different strength and different, there's really big problems and there's not such big problems. And I don't look down on anyone's problem choice, but in my own life, the bigger the problem generally means to me that it's going to have an influence on a lot of people and on the whole universe. I love things that we do here that everybody thrives from. I love things that we think about in LA that reach out across communities. And when I think about the planet, that's what inspires me. So that's why I find these amazing artists and poets and others, because they can say it so much more beautifully than I can. But you read one line of Terry Tempest Williams and you immediately want to go out and fight forever to have it be sustaining. So, you just reach out. But I think most people want to do something that's good and of benefit. And it's totally fine to want to do that while promoting your own career and advancing. I want to see a lot more leaders, but it is much more fun to see everybody else advance, honestly, than it ever is just to see yourself advance. So I think you keep going back. I'm looking at the perfect example. So many of you, the more chance you have to do things for people beyond yourself, it just is almost impossible to go back and want to just do it at a smaller level. So you get to be a leader in anything, from your club, your lab, or anything. You get already the amazing gratification, the rising tide, another water thing.
I think in terms of more accountability as students, as faculty, as members of the LA community, what opportunities do you see for, whether it's the curriculum, whether it's funding, whether it's our impact to our campus, to our surrounding neighborhoods, where do you see that we can start putting sustainability in more of a measurable, empowering way for students? Maybe it's through coursework, maybe it's through the classes offered, maybe it's through the projects that we're funding. Where is a path forward for those of us that care enough to do something?
So I love it. I'm looking at some of the leaders on the Sustainability Task Force who can tell you these things much more directly. But for example, I think we have 17,000 enrollments right now in environmental courses on campus. That's actually really large, but we want to see that be 34,000 in the next 3 years. So I think first of all, faculty and students have a chance to really direct more and more in these areas, and they're in all schools. They touch all different definitions of what might be thought of sustainability, but we need to give people the tools. People can't solve things they don't understand. They can't solve things that we don't even measure. So I think that's part of it. What can we measure? How can we get better with letting people know what our plastic waste is? How can we let people know the things that we do, and how does that affect them? How does your air conditioning affect? I mean, there's a lot of ideas about how we can be much more transparent with our own operations, and then more, I've been in places where they do competitions between residence halls or other things. There's ways that you can get people to be part of that. Let's reduce it. Instead of 15,000 bottles, let's make it 30,000, whatever it is. So I think you can start bringing people in a playful way to be part of it, while also educating them, building out these classes, and then getting these very specific programs. All the materials work done here in Viterbi, what are sustainable materials, design, architecture. This relationship between the architecture school and Viterbi is a chance for real fundamental change. So again, that goes back to trying to help people have a way that they can work together? Can you spark it with some cross-disciplinary research funding? Can you help them make those contacts? So it keeps going back to what do we do really well in universities? We try to educate people, we try to spark their curiosity, we try to help them get moving, and so I think we do those same things in sustainability. Someone had a great idea today about building a whole channel, sort of a social media channel that would be absolutely geared toward these sustainability externs. There's nothing like that. And who's got the greatest media schools? Who's got all the great people doing all this work? You start thinking, whoa, who could do that besides USC? So I'm pretty convinced in the next 6 to 9 months we're going to get a lot more ideas from people about what we can do to get that building, that groundswell. But on a more practical level, just not using plastic, I'm not convinced that's going to be that easy, in spite of the fact that everybody tells me they want to do it. So I do think we're going to come up a little bit to a realization that we want to do all this stuff, but it actually does take people doing it. I waste a lot of energy myself. When am I going to start holding myself accountable, So I think there's ways that we can help people think that through. I get on a plane whenever I want to, and I fly all over. Like, look at that. That is a huge cost a university does. So do we talk to people about that? Do we contribute to funds to help make green skies? I think there's bigger challenges ahead for all of us that we need to take on, and they will involve personal commitment as well as the university. And I do think about that. The planes are a real one to think about. But there's some good ways to measure those costs and start thinking, do we actually start honestly keeping track of that cost and truly making a financial commitment to override it? I think we should do that, but it's not tiny. So I think those are things that we think about. I think the task force talked about that and wants to do something like that. So.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off your answer and give Diego a little plug, he's one of the cohort of students that traveled to rural Alaska this year through one of our classes, and I kind of tagged along, and it was one of the most inspiring educational experiences that I've been a part of, and a lot of the professors that started that program are here today, and a lot of the students are here. But we went to rural Alaska, and we met with hundreds and hundreds of people, and we tried to get empathy for the types of problems that they face from day to day, whether it be water or energy or waste. And I think those types of experiences, I've never seen anything like that at any other university. So I think the university support of classes and innovative programs like that, I saw the changes in the students over a semester. So that was really an incredible experience to be a part of.
I'm glad that you said that, because really, now I'm talking to faculty and graduate students, the truth is you do affect people's lives in enormous ways. I still get letters from people that I might have been an advisor for at Dartmouth 30 years ago that suddenly will write out of, these are the ones that just warm your heart, just out of the blue, saying, you probably won't even remember me. I was one of X people in a class, but I carried that forever, and this is what I'm doing now. That is the greatest gift of being part of a university, and so that is where you're educating people, you're planting the seeds for that army of people in the future, and I love that we have classes really doing that. That gives me goosebumps too. That's really, really great.
We have time for one or two more questions.
Sustainability measures did you include in order to build that?
I could give it to Giannis because he's the work, but it is at the highest level. Yeah, with all the materials. Talk about it a little bit, because it's going to be a showcase, and it's a really important part. It added money to the cost, so that's a case where you make a decision. Do you add the money to the cost, or do you not? Well, we thought we add the money, and so I think that's really important. Do you want to do a quick one on that, because it's really it's going to be so fun.
I could, but we have an expert in the room here, which is David Gerber, who's an architect and knows everything.
Yes, that's right.
So Mohammed, I think there's a number of things that the university did, including the fact that the building's LEED Platinum, but also making a brave decision to, for the first time on this campus, do radiant heat in the building, which is a brave move from an operational standpoint, but also a very smart long-term move. Plus, there's a whole bunch of other things that have been put into the building, including concepts for using the building as a living lab, integrating faculty research into everything that happens in the building on display, as well as just the way that the architecture has been generated is also unique in the way that FMS or FPM now has been working with the Dean's Office and faculty and being very inclusive of all of the needs and ideas. I think it's actually quite cutting edge. It's going to be fantastic to see built.
Yeah, and related to that, when I first came, there was a 5-year, there was a plan to look at how do we recreate every building for earthquake problems. And really important, costs a lot of money, we have to do it. I said we need to do that exactly for sustainability. So every time we do a renovation, what do we do that fixes earthquakes, makes them more sustainable? These are not inexpensive, so you need to really decide that's your priority. And a lot of these beautiful buildings are actually really not built at all to be sustainable, which is really a shame. That's why you don't see all the solar panels on all of them. But that doesn't mean we won't get there. We will continue to deal with it, but you do need that. You need to do it for every building that you build new. The harder ones is for all the buildings that aren't new, but we have that, and our operation people are really working on it, but new things are going to be discovered to make it better. It's really important.
Thank you so much. Connor, did you have a question?
Yeah. So you've kind of touched on like how much influence the university has within the city, but we also kind of have like a large geographic footprint as well, especially here in South Los Angeles. So how can we as a university ensure that while meeting our sustainability goals, some of the benefits roll over into those neighborhoods in which our university occupies and not just the campuses?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and that's one of the really great things about this task force, and actually for my whole sustainability approach, is we have to walk the walk here. And I have the most control here. I can't control a lot of things that might happen just one block away. So you have to be both understanding where you have that influence to it, but we can't do things that are going to have negative impacts on the neighborhood. That you can also control. So you have two ways of starting. What can we do? We have to do what we have to say what we do and do what we say. Then we have to have programs that try to include the neighbors in all of them. So and I think we are, and we're in two of the most important areas, the HSC campus and the UPC campus. We cover a lot of neighborhoods. And we have service programs, education programs, daycare programs. I mean, unbelievable. There isn't another university more directly involved in its local neighborhood than USC. And expanding that to be the sustainability footprint is important. But I'll just tell you an example of how complicated it can be. So putting trees in neighborhoods. Do you think we just go out and pick what trees and where to put them in a neighborhood? No, that is an awful thing. It sounds really good on paper. I remember, oh yeah, let's go, I'll get an army of people, we'll go out and well, of course not. So they didn't do it that way. They've been out in the neighborhoods. And it's very complicated. These neighborhoods, some of them, an elderly person could get off a bus, walk home in the heat and not even make it home because there is no shade, no water. But when you talk to people about putting a tree in their neighborhood, in their property, they might say no because that's where someone's going to get robbed. None of these things are easy. So the reality is you only do it in partnership with the neighborhood. And so all the committees that we've put together so far, since I've been here, if there are issues like that, they have neighbors having a voice and working together. And that's why this first project that they did come up with, they worked with the neighbors, they came up with the trees, where you put them, the time of year, all of that, so that everyone could feel like they're making a forward progress. And so that will be true for many issues that we work on. And we can't be perceived about putting our own footprint on things that are perceived as destroying the fabric of a community or taking away their own autonomy. So it's not, it is not sustainable if we do it that way. But that would be a good definition of sustainable. You put something in place that makes everybody so upset that you're going to have to take it all down. That would be a pretty bad sustainability move. So I'm really glad you asked that.
Well, Dr. Folt, I want to be considerate of your time. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. And so I just thought, to wrap this up, we have so many students and faculty that came into the sustainability profession or the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering because they want to do something good with their talents, whether it be through their research or their ultimate job. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions or recommendations about how we make our impact, how we elevate the significance of our research. You had a career where your science mattered, and you had a career now where your actions day to day matter to the local community. So how do we follow in your footsteps? How do we make an impact? Any suggestions?
Well, I think you're already way beyond my footsteps. I mean, you have tools that I couldn't have dreamed of. You know how, you are digital natives, many of you. You know, and you're learning, and you live in a big, bustling diversity. The lab that you live in gives you skills that you don't even realize yet. So, I spent a lot of my time in Hanover, New Hampshire. Beautiful, I love it, wonderful. But we were so isolated from the world. So I was really good on pristine systems. Could really do that, love teaching. So take advantage of this incredible place that not only exists, but you're a part of. You already are of that place. So you have a chance to bring new things to these conversations that need to come, because sustainability is only going to be something we adopt if it hits to the vibrancy of our youth, if it hits to the vibrancy of the millions left behind. We need to really start thinking about all those issues. And I think you're here, you're doing it, you have those skills, and so you just should never think of yourself as not having that access to that. And as you tap into it, reach out to people, you'll do it in a truly glorious way. But the really wonderful thing about this field is that you won't be copying any of us. And that's the biggest freedom in the world. There's nobody out there that you need to be like. You get to be who you are, and that's how it's going to change. And I think you'll understand what that means, but in a small way. When I started in the field, there were no women in my department, in anything that I did as a woman in science. So I never had to act or look like anybody else, because I didn't have anyone that I even knew how to follow, and I couldn't certainly start acting and looking just like all my colleagues. So that's been a freedom for me, and that is your biggest freedom right now. Is the world is rewriting this playbook. We are rewriting it right now at USC in the world, and it's going to get rewritten next year and the year after. I call it pretzeling. It is changing, and you get to be part of it with great faculty that want to do it with you. But you don't have to think any idea is too small or any dream is too big. And this is not always true. It's usually true at the birth of something, and in a way this is the birth or the rebirth of the sustainability movement in America, is right now. And so I wish I could start over. But I'm going to watching all you and see how you do it, because I can't even predict it.
Well, thank you so much. That was a really inspiring note to end on. I would love everyone to thank President Folt. Thank you so much.